Let's reveal the answer key, your case study, answer key, a key to a better understanding of the GTR method is here. A key to a better understanding of the GTR method is here. Welcome to your GTR Answer Key. In this episode, we're talking about the case study called Doing the Right Thing. This case study features the client Marcus, and this was my 13th GTR session with him. Thanks to all the work we did previously, Marcus's self is now solidifying, and he's currently much more able to own his needs, his wants, and preferences. In this very session, we find Marcus at a point where he is facing a frustrating parenting dilemma. Now, because we started diving into the body intuition activation with Marcus, we are now going to use these tools to help him make the right decision. When it comes to body intuition, for most people, there's usually a part of their intuition, whether it's the upper body intuition, the gut, or the lower intuition, that they have the hardest time with in terms of accessing it. If there are injuries, aches, tensions that are concentrated mostly in one of these parts, then this might cause more difficulty in connecting with that part of the body and its intuition. And this is why it's so important to practice the dropping safely into the body first, meaning before diving into helping the client activate any of their body intuitions. That way, they're more comfortable just staying, observing, hanging in there for long enough to see what the body has to share with them. This session is a good example of how just teaching the client the tools is not usually enough. We want to train them in using these tools in everyday life situations. It's a good example that people who had trauma for a longer time need to regain the skills they would normally have if it weren't for the trauma, such as accessing their body for information and guidance. Here's what one of our students shared in regards of the upper body intuition. She said, "This exercise confirmed something that I've known for a while. I spent a considerable amount of my life with very overdeveloped upper body intuition, which could often throw off my lower and middle body intuition and get the messages muddled. When I first tuned in and started tapping the different points of my upper body, I realized this tends to be where I get the tingly sensation, goosebumps or shivers, when I really desire something, or it feels like a direction that I want to go in. However, there are nuances to those tingles, and they don't always mean I should go rushing into a situation. This actually took a long time for me to learn because I was often told chills and tingles were automatically a sign that you were on the right path." I'm very grateful for this sharing, by the way, because it highlights how important it is to learn one's own body intuition language. And this is for you personally as practitioners, so that your unique body intuition language can serve you during your sessions with clients to give you a good estimate of what's happening in the session or even with the client, and also in your life. The body intuition language will not be the same for everyone. For someone, the goosebumps, the shivers, the tingles might be a heads up, go signal. But for somebody else, this might be quite the opposite. It might mean the pause, take your time, or even don't go there at all. The upper body intuition process also includes this technique that is so very good for overgivers. and it is this envisioning pushing the heart gently backwards. It's an optional step in the upper body intuition activation. However, we got so much good feedback from our students over the years. It's especially a technique used and designed for people who have a tendency to be too giving and who perhaps have weak boundaries with others. These people tend to be over attuned to the emotions and needs of others, and therefore can get overwhelmed with excessive empathy and compassion when someone else is in distress while neglecting themselves. Now, I find that most practitioners have sometimes a rather overdeveloped empathy and compassion for others. And this, in and of itself, isn't a bad thing, but sometimes it's at their own expense. This technique of just gently pushing your heart backwards is such a great and easy technique for all of you empathetic and very compassionate practitioners out there. Wearing your heart on your chest or on your sleeve is exactly what this technique addresses. Being in this pattern can really feel like your heart is a little too exposed, which is not ideal for healthy boundaries and self protection. Not even in situation when you're trying to help another with your whole heart. One of our students shared, I tried this and I immediately felt a big difference. I felt more centered, steady, and secure right away. This is a technique I plan on using regularly with myself and clients, and I think it fits in really well with discussions on boundaries, self protection, and having a distinct sense of ourselves apart from other people. Now, this session also highlighted the shifting of intentions behind your client's choices. After going through his upper body intuition and scanning his lower body too, Marcus came to the conclusion to keep doing what he'd already been doing in response to his ex parenting choices. In other words, his right course of action was to continue offering the support, the boundaries, and standards that he's already been offering to his children. He's not going to attempt to make big changes or try to change his ex or convince her to do things differently or any other intervention. However, what did change was his intention. His intent behind the actions is what shifted. He's now going to provide support simply to be a steady model of discipline, healthy structure, and boundaries. And he hopes this will positively influence his children. He's not 100% in control of this because he's not the only influence in their life, but this is the choice that feels right for him. It's the same behavior, but now executed with a completely different intention behind it. Here's what one of our students shared. Seeing the shift in Marcus by changing the intent behind his choice was a good reminder for me of how that's actually been a struggle for me. Distancing myself from my mother for my own mental health was something that I avoided doing for years, despite it feeling right. And my reasoning for holding off was that I didn't want to do the same thing that she did to others. My mother regularly uses the silent treatment as a form of control, and limiting contact with her felt like I was doing the same thing and stooping to her level. However, the intent behind our behavior is completely different. My mother breaks off contact to withhold her attention and care, whereas I was distancing myself for self preservation rather than to harm or control. These distinctions are especially important when we've seen abusive modeling of certain behaviors. It's not always the behavior itself, but the intent behind it that can indicate whether it's a healthy or unhealthy choice. What do we notice about Marcus in this particular session? Well, let's first start looking at his relationship to anger and how redefined it was over time. We have seen in the previous sessions how his relationship to the emotion of anger needed to be redefined as part of his healing process. Now, this happens over several sessions most of the time for most clients. In this session, Marcus shows significant progress in his relationship to anger. This is an emotion that he has struggled with because his upbringing modeled very toxic and abusive anger to him. Marcus's anger in this session, however, is the empowered anger. And even though we often think of venting as something that's perhaps negative, Marcus's ability to do this without self judgment represents a very positive step forward. As he speaks about his ex and the ways that her decisions about parenting are making him worry for their children, we can see the clarity that empowered anger brings. Rather than being clouded by doubt and repressing what he feels, empowered anger allows Marcus to see and understand his ex's behavior clearly. He sees that his ex is being overly lenient and more like a friend than a parent, and he's also quick to notice that this is a tactic to seem like the good or fun parent, a choice that can have long term consequences for their children's development and schooling. Marcus openly states that he's angry about how his ex is handling things, and we can see a change in him here. He gives his ex full ownership over her own choices and actions and differentiates his own responsibility. In the past, Marcus didn't make this distinction. His sense of responsibility was enmeshed with other people's, and he'd take ownership for other people's actions, assuming they were good and right, and he was the flawed one. In this case study, Marcus doesn't look to others to define what's right, and he makes his perceptions acceptable. He voices his stance that what his ex is doing is wrong and stands firmly by his own viewpoint and choice and the rightful anger that he feels. He doesn't even get sucked into the label of rageaholic that he says his ex has tried to use with him in the past when he'd get angry. He knows he's entitled to anger and that this is not an overreaction. Now, this is a major shift for Marcus. When he first began to do the GTR work, he had a very hard time owning his anger, and he tended to view any expression of anger as being too harsh or too much like his father. Not only does Marcus allow his anger in this session, but also he stays with it for quite a while, and he does so without getting dysregulated. His language and his facial expressions make his frustration obvious, but he isn't carried away or overwhelmed by his anger. He doesn't make it mean something negative about himself either. He's steady and he trusts his feelings as correctly indicating that there's an injustice happening. Marcus's boundaries strengthen as well over time. There's an even deeper shift in Marcus regarding his anger and how it relates to parenthood. Marcus has understandably been wary of showing or feeling too much anger, not only in his life in general, but as a father. His own father's expressions of anger were rageful and abusive, and in earlier sessions, Marcus expressed a fear that somewhere within him, this same rageful monster was lurking and could come out any time. He was scared that he'd become his father, and he never wanted to be like that. However, in this session, it's important to note that Marcus's anger is not just in service of himself and his own boundaries. Most of his concerns are actually centered around his children and their needs, as well as their future. Marcus's anger at his ex parenting choices is not an indicator of him becoming like his father. Rather, it's a sign for him to pay attention to in order to protect both himself and his children. As a parent, it's his responsibility to both take care of his own boundaries and to ensure that his children's boundaries are being respected as well. His ex's tendency for too much lenience without structure and simply allowing the kids to make whatever choice they want is not a fair or healthy thing for a parent to do. Children don't have the brain development, boundary skills, or life experience to always distinguish what feels good to them from what is good for them. Marcus realizes this, and as he says, this isn't actually freeing or nice for their children. In fact, it limits their freedom later on because they will lack crucial skills for independence and decision making. This is unfair to the children, and Marcus's anger allows him to recognize and name this unfairness, and also to respond to it by gaining clarity on what action he needs to take for both his and his children's sake. So, anger has not revealed an inner monster for Marcus. It's actually done the exact opposite. Being in touch with his empowered anger is allowing Marcus to both take care of himself and be an attentive parent who takes action to protect his children from harm. Wonderful. I hope this answer key gave you some hope on how to handle and work with clients where the emotion of anger is an ongoing issue because of their trauma history. You can see how Marcus first was so afraid of anger, wanting to run away from it, and how he eventually learned to harvest the power of this emotion. And this was happening as his own sense of self was solidifying throughout the GTR work process. And I will be looking forward to talking to you again the next time. Bye for now.